A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
This week in New South Wales, a heavily changed version of Alex Greenwich's Equality Bill was passed by the Legislative Assembly, or the lower house in New South Wales. The bill was supported by Labor and the Greens, and it was opposed by the Liberals and Nationals. Mike Southon is Executive Director of Freedom for Faith, activating the church to defend religious freedom. He's been across the issues and what's changed and what hasn't. Hey, Mike, welcome back to 2020.
Thanks, Neil. Great to be here.
Mike, the bill did pass, but there was a lot of change. Give us your insight into the overall, because this was, we were talking about this earlier, and this was a diabolical-looking bill that was going before the New South Wales Parliament.
Yeah, it was abhorrent. And what's changed is about 80 to 90% of the bill has been deleted. And so it's much shorter, and a large number of the things that we were really worried about have just been flat out removed. What remains is sex self-ID, so being able to change your sex on your birth certificate, and a couple of other tweakings around prostitution and commercial surrogacy, but again, nowhere near as bad as what was in the original bill.
I'm sure you would have preferred that the bill didn't even exist and that none of these provisions had passed through. Is that the case? Because it's one of those things, they asked for a mile and they only got a little, but they still got something.
Yes. There's nothing in the bill that most faith communities could find any redeeming value in. Most of the things that were specific threats to religious freedom, I should say all the things that were specific threats to religious freedom have been removed. But still, the idea that you can change your sex on your birth certificate and hence live according to a different sex to how God has made you is something that many faith communities are still quite concerned about.
Let's go through some of the provisions that were removed, and I know that there'll be a lot of listeners surprised that these things were even in a bill that was coming before the Parliament, but what were the things that were removed?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that was removed is changes to the Anti-Discrimination Act. What was in the Anti-Discrimination Act was exemptions saying that religious organisations and faith-based schools could treat people differently based on sex and gender and sexuality, and that's a fairly uncontroversial thing to think. Christians believe certain things about how people should live out their sexuality, and we expect that people that we employ to live according to that. And those things are protected by exemptions in the Discrimination Act. Now, this bill would have just removed a large number of those exemptions and watered down the others. So it would have made it very difficult, even for churches, to be thinking about who they employ and whether they live out their sexuality in a faithful Christian way. That was one of the really big, nasty changes that they made. Stripped the rights completely from schools and undermined churches and other faith-based organisations.
So we might breathe a sigh of relief that went out of the bill. What else was there that was removed?
Yes, I will just say on that sigh of relief, it's a held sigh because right now New South Wales government is undergoing a review of the Anti-Discrimination Act. And so starting next year, we're going to have this conversation all over again. But what else was removed? Another big bit was legislation that would have allowed a child to get medical treatment without their parents' consent. And particular, be helping them to get puberty blockers and that sort of medical treatment, bypassing their parents simply if there was a doctor who was saying that, no, this is a good thing for the child and they know what they're doing. That's also been dropped by the bill. Other stuff that was removing laws around prostitution. So, for instance, there is currently in New South Wales a statute which makes it illegal to coerce a person to commit an act of prostitution. This bill would have removed that. And again, that's no longer the case. So a number of these really key, very big problematic things have been removed.
But you did say there were some things in this bill, and they have gone through. One of those was to do with sex on birth certificates. How does that look, and what's so serious about that?
Well, being able to change the sex on your birth certificate means you have changed your sex according to the law. And in a very broad, and what the original, Alex Greenwich's original bill, would have meant that everybody legally has to treat you as this new sex. And that would have included prisons, women's gyms, refuges, all these sorts of places, particularly places which are safe spaces for women, would have had to have treated you according to your newly claimed sex on your birth certificate. Now, that has also been watered down in this legislation. There are exemptions for schools and prison, not for schools, I shouldn't say, but exemptions for toilets and change rooms, prisons, sport, women's refuges, and, to quote, any other place, whatever that means. But it's a fairly broad statement saying that this is changing your birth certificate, but isn't actually saying you can suddenly say, now I'm a woman, I can go into all these places. So that's a very positive change. The other positive change is that in the original bill, the age that you could change your sex was 16. And that's, 16-year-olds, as we all know, are medically and biologically crazy. So allowing them to change their sex on a whim was really dangerous. That age has now been raised to 18, which is also very helpful for same-sex schools. By the time you turn 18 and try and change your sex on your birth certificate, you're pretty close to the HSC or you're already out of school. So that's another positive change.
When we say the word exemptions, and this is the way anti-discrimination law has worked for a long time, and churches' exemptions, I know that Christian leaders have been fighting so that this is the law, there is no such thing as just exemptions, because exemptions can be easily changed at a later time, can't they? Is that where the weakness is, in there just being exemptions for churches?
Yeah, and the weakness is just in the language of exemption. I mean, the reason we have exemptions, just to understand how Australian law works, Australian law doesn't actually say you have the right to do something. The law assumes you can do anything you want unless it's made illegal. And so the way that Australian law protects, for instance, women from being discriminated against is by creating a law saying you cannot discriminate against women. So then you say, well, you can't discriminate against women. Oh, wait, Catholic churches want to only have male priests. Now we have to write in an exemption. So you have this sort of structure, and that's just how the law works in Australia. And the problem, though, is that it ends up saying discrimination is bad. Oh, and these people want the right to discriminate. How terrible are they? So the language of exemption automatically puts faith groups on the back foot, because we actually want to say, no, there's something good and right about being able to say there are differences between people and we operate differently with different people. It's okay for a women's gym to only have women. But again, in our law, that's protected by an exemption from discrimination. What we'd really like to see is more positive statements saying you have a right as people of faith to have churches and institutions and schools that operate according to your faith. A positive statement of our rights rather than just an exemption, which is a little corner bit of anti-discrimination legislation.
Well, this equality bill certainly was an example of ever-tightening bands around the church and Christians. And as you said, they'll be back again next year. Perhaps another bill with a different name, the same sorts of arguments. That's something that's likely to be before New South Wales voters again next year.
Absolutely. The Anti-Discrimination Act, the entire Act, is being reviewed by the government. And so we know that there is going to be a brand new Anti-Discrimination Act brought into New South Wales. What we need to work on for the next months is to make sure that it doesn't look like the brand new act that was brought by the Queensland government a couple of months ago, which stripped all faith organisations of their rights. Now, we defeated that act in Queensland, which was good, but we've got to then, the same process is going to happen in New South Wales. We have to go through the whole conversation again and explain why it is good and right for faith organisations to be able to operate according to their faith.
And you're a busy man right now, Mike Southon, because there's an election on in the ACT this weekend. There's a Queensland state election coming up, and Freedom for Faith's been very busy looking after some special pre-election forums. And, of course, then you'll be looking ahead to a federal election next year. This is a busy season for you, isn't it?
Absolutely, and Western Australian election at the start of March. There's a lot going on, and we're seeing in almost every state some piece of legislation that's undermining religious freedom is on the bubble. And of course, we've got the misinformation, disinformation bill federally, and quite a few things happening in the federal government as well. It is a absolutely crazy time for religious freedom issues, yes.
Well, no doubt there are listeners who will be very thankful that there are some people like you on the job, at least keeping us informed and being on the front line of the battle, occasionally seeing a win and seeing some things that not quite wins, but, when just like this equality bill, at least the whole thing and all of the bad stuff didn't get through, just a few things around the edges, but even that not good. Let me point people to how they can connect with you, Mike. Freedom for Faith, your executive director. No doubt there'll be people who will want to subscribe and get some email regular updates. Let me give the website. It's fff.org.au. Freedom for Faith, fff.org.au, or you can just go freedomforfaith.org.au. There'll be all sorts of good things on there, resources and links to contact MPs. In fact, I think you still have a website functioning, contactyourmp.org.au. Mike Southon, thanks so much for giving us this update today on 2020.
Thanks for talking to me.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.